Thank you so much, Annie. And the panel are going to join me here on screen. So hello and welcome everyone to this evening's webinar on the emotional recovery after a cardiac event and the emotional impact of a cardiac event. My name is Dr. Hynes. I'm a health psychologist and I'm the head of health programs with Croí Heart and Stroke Centre here in Galway. We're really excited to be hosting this event this evening on this so important topic that doesn't always get kind of enough attention or discussion. Believe it or not, we have over 200 people registered for the webinar this evening. So you're not alone in wanting to find out more about this topic. This week, we're delighted to be welcoming the panel, Noelle O'Keefe, Maeve Frawley, and Jonathan Walsh. Noelle O'Keefe is a senior counselling psychologist and professional coach working in Tala University Hospital with the cardiac rehab team. Maeve Frawley is a cardiovascular nurse specialist and the Heartlink West nurse on the Heartlink West helpline with Croí. And Jonathan Walsh is joining us this evening from Mayo to share his own personal experience of experiencing a cardiac event. So we're so grateful to have you here this evening, Jonathan. Jonathan had a cardiac event over 2 years ago and actually completed a virtual cardiac rehab program with us in Croí called Croí My Sláinte. We also have Emma Ryan, who you will see at the end of the session. Emma's going to talk to you a bit about some research that she's going to be working on a kind of a very relevant topic, the experience of anxiety after a heart attack. So you'll hear a little bit more from Emma at the end of the session, and you can contact her if you're interested in that study. Thank you, Emma. So thank you so much for joining us, to the panel, and to Emma, Jonathan, Noelle, and Maeve, and all of you across Ireland who have logged in this evening on this beautiful sunny evening. So very impressive. The questions are already starting to come in, and as Annie said, we've gathered questions before the event also, and we get so many questions on the topic of the emotional impact of a cardiac event and how to deal with that, how to cope with that in Croí all the time. So lots to be working on. I'm going to try to do my best to bring all of these questions and kind of themes and concerns to the panel for discussion. So to start off, Jonathan, can I ask you to set the scene for us, please? As someone who has experienced a cardiac event, could you tell us what happened and the immediate impact that it had on your life?
Yeah, no, yes, Lisa, thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be here on the panel. So yeah, just as you mentioned, so over 2 years ago, I had a heart attack. I was 36 years old, so it came as a massive shock. I think what actually made that shock even bigger was leading up to the heart attack, I had no symptoms whatsoever, other than I felt fatigued, which at the time I was in the job I was in was very stressful, and I just put it down to a little bit of home work-life balance. So when I had the heart attack, it just really knocked me for six. I went from being what I thought was a healthy individual, 36-year-old young male, to being rushed to hospital, into the cath lab, 7 stents in total, and this was all new to me. I'd never had any dealings with any of my heart before. I'd never even had a day off sick from work for 10 years, so it just came as a real big shock, which I think was one of the overwhelming sort of feelings that I had. I think the initial impact physically, I was in hospital for a couple of weeks, and I knew I was in great care with the healthcare professionals, and they were really reassuring, and they gave me some fantastic advice and support. But what I actually found was the biggest impact post the event was my emotions, my mental health. Immediately, I had this overwhelming anxiety feeling of what's going to happen in my life, what happens after a heart attack. I always associated heart attack with a different generation. I didn't think it was a 36-year-old person's problem, and I just had this overwhelming anxiety. It was from literally moments after the heart attack. It was like fear, anxiety, and so it really sort of impacted me quite quickly. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. The shock, the anxiety, it makes so much sense, coming out of nowhere like that. And as you said, in your busy life, you didn't see it coming. Maeve, from your perspective as a nurse with many years experience, what kind of reactions have you seen to a cardiac event? And then maybe Noelle, you can help us to maybe understand those different reactions a little bit more.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I think, Jonathan, you have well gone through quite a lot of your reactions. So I'm nursing in cardiology for 20, 25, 30 years maybe. So acute care nursing. And now I am, as Lisa said, running the Heartlink West helpline. So I've seen many reactions like that, Jonathan. And I suppose the beginning, people are in hospital, it's a sudden event. They're discharged very quickly. You could be 3 to 5 days in hospital. So there's kind of a joy or nearly an elation. Oh, I've had an event. I'm doing really well. Everybody's telling me I'm doing really well. And off home you go. And it's when you go home, the emotional impact of that is, did that actually happen to me? You know, or who was that person? Um, and for other people, the emergency care service coming in, if you're at home and your family or you are ringing 999, the next thing there's an ambulance crew, there's an advanced paramedic, or you may be rushed off in an air ambulance to a primary cardiology center. You might never have gotten into an air flight before. The trauma of that, and again, I'm finding in Heartlink West, that's what people are coming up saying. It's actually when they go home, these reactions are hitting them. Um, that fear, the loss of independence, and a grief that, and you're at home, and everybody has told you you've done really well, perhaps, but you're just not feeling it, and you don't know where to go or how to manage these emotions.
Yeah, such a range of reactions. Thank you, Maeve. And Noelle, can you share with us from your perspective what might be going on here for different people?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So I suppose the reactions and the lived experience that Janet has described and the reactions that Maeve has gone through are, I suppose, what we can anticipate maybe when someone goes through a trauma. So as has been said, a cardiac event, it is usually very sudden, it is unexpected, it is certainly unplanned for and certainly unwelcome. And so that immediately turns us upside down and inside out very quickly. We're used to living our lives with a sense of routine, a sense of predictability, a sense of knowing what's going to happen next. So then something comes left of center and punches through that protective sense that we have day to day. So I suppose there's a thing about as someone comes into the emergency care, or however they get there, whether they walk into A&E or they're brought in with the flashing lights, their physiological system is in a state of threat. The definition of trauma is when your life is under threat. So if you're having a heart attack, your life is under threat. And so there's a very focused need by the physicians and so on to get this person to a physical place of safety. And I suppose the reactions that come thereafter are the flush out to somebody going through a traumatic experience. Those immediate feelings can't come while you're physically trying to survive, but they come after the fact. And as Maeve said, you've been shipped out of hospital. Everyone has told you you're fine. You've got your stents. You're very lucky, so on and so forth. And you go home with this emotional burst. And, I suppose I often make reference to COVID-19 last year when the world was under trauma. People were anxious, people were nervous, they wanted to stay close to home. So I suppose we know that when someone goes through a type of trauma like a cardiac event, there is going to be those feelings of vulnerability, disorientation, shock, a sense of surreal, that the world is continuing and your life has just, so you're trying to find those safe boundaries that are shifted. And so a lot of we often use the term in psychology, like there are normal reactions to abnormal events. So when I work with people and they say, I've got overwhelming anxiety and, this fear of going too far from home, and I've just had a heart attack, I have a very different way of interacting with that person than if they just said, well, I fear leaving home, but nothing's happened in my life. So I suppose there's a set of reactions of which the cardiac ones fall into that we understand as being reaction to trauma. And I suppose, unfortunately, the medical systems can be set up in a way, I mean, in Tala we have got psychology, which is good, but oftentimes people don't get to have the education around that trauma reaction and how to rebalance it, how long it might last. So, for example, perhaps 6 to 8 weeks after an event, you can anticipate a tumultuous emotional experience. I suppose when it's not, it's like a wave has burst up and it's coming up and down and you've all sorts of emotions day in, day out. Where that doesn't start to settle, we need to look a little further. We often think about the measure of the emotion, the measure of the reaction. And I suppose what Jonathan said there about this overwhelming anxiety, that was a very immediate trauma response that his threat system had not yet turned itself off. The rest of his physiological world had not yet understood that he is physically okay now. And I suppose that's the piece of where there needs to be a lot of work on grounding, on familiarity, on easy, gentle tasks, and being very gentle and kind, where a lot of self-compassion comes in, because you need to change the threat system into the caregiving system. So that other side of the central nervous system, which has the power to heal, we just often don't give that side enough of a platform. So.
Thank you, Noelle. That's fascinating. So I suppose we're starting to move from that immediate impact and the kind of normal and expected reaction to an unexpected event, to start to think about the adjustment, the post-event, the post-hospital period. So, obviously this coming to terms and rebalancing is so important and a process, but there can be so much uncertainty for people. And you've started to touch there, Noelle, on some ways that people can start, switching things over, I suppose, in the system. Would you be able to maybe go into that in a little bit more detail, maybe helping people to understand specifically how they can come to terms with this?
I mean, I suppose the thing about the part that can often get missed is the understanding of what trauma reactions look like. So, people sometimes after a cardiac event, they can think, God, have I anxiety now? Have I depression now? Whereas actually that first piece of understanding the trauma reaction is often overlooked. So sometimes with people, we actually have to go back and get them to talk through and think through what was their piece, what was their story, what were their fears during it, because that does need a flush out. I suppose, there's the idea of coming to terms with something. In bereavement work, it is not recommended to attend counselling for 3 months after a death. And the reason for that is there is a need to come back to normal living to see what will rebalance naturally, what will heal naturally. I suppose it's similar in any reaction to an event. Unfortunately, we can't take away the unpleasant emotions, the unpleasant reactions. We can simply watch them, from a distance and keep an eye on them, that they are starting to be less dysregulated, really. I mean, I suppose there is that idea of adjusting or accepting, which is quite a tall order to accept something like that. I like to use the term much more of, starting to commit to something, starting to integrate. Something has come into your life, you did not ask for it, but it's there. So how do you start to find a type of relationship with it? And I would say to people, just take it very slowly. This idea of a lifelong, chronic, ongoing, I put those words aside. Let's take the first 3 months, see how we go. Let's check in at 6 and so on and so forth. Let's take it across the summer. You're not working for the summer. Let's take it across the summer. So I do think there's something about the language that can be used. I think there's something about people understanding what were their preconceived notions of heart attack. As Jonathan said, doesn't happen to 36-year-olds, and so examining what did that mean for me at this point in time. And I suppose there's something as well in coming to to the daily adjustment, as that starts to settle, and as I say to people, do less rather than more, be kind and be gentle, that what can start to come in then is space for looking at making some meaning out of this. Where does it fit in your life? Why did it happen now? What may need to change? What may need to, be a little bit different? And as I often say, it's for me in the work that I do, there's something about, as you're adjusting, how do you ensure that your heart and the emotional center, and I suppose the sacred chamber that the heart is, we talk about, joy and heartache and so on and so forth. How does that come in a, I suppose, maybe a fuller way, that it has stuck with you. So how do you stick with it? So yeah.
Thank you. That's a great image. The heart has stuck with you. How do you stick with it? Thank you, Noelle. And you mentioned there the importance of slowing down and taking things in, chunks of time. I suppose so we have one kind of relevant question that I might put to you, Maeve, with this in mind. People want to understand what something like this is going to mean for the life that they had before this event, and it can be so hard to slow down. So this question: when my heart attack happened, I was on a hill walk with friends. Will I ever be able to do things like this again that I really enjoy? And we get questions like this so much, don't we, Maeve?
Yeah.
People want to know, will I ever be able to return to my normal life? Do you have anything to say on that?
Well, look, that comes up time and again, yes. And what my first thing is to say, yes, you will. And, you've gone through an experience and the trauma, and you haven't realized what's happening in your body for the preceding months before that. So you've been really, really pushing yourself, maybe unknowns to yourself. As Jonathan said, you might have thought it was life balance was, stressing you out. But now you're going to go home with more opened coronary arteries. So your heart function is hopefully going to have improved. So yes, you will be able to get back to a life and a healthier life, because you'll be so exhausted from in hospital, from cardiac rehab, hearing all about the lifestyle changes, the diet, the exercise, and hopefully you'll be able to embrace it and be able to get back to your fitness level. And it's important for that person, if walking was what they enjoy doing, yes, get back out there and walk within what the guidelines of discharge are. So you'll probably have met a cardiac rehab nurse and a physiotherapist that's saying, we'll do a 6-week recovery program, start to exercise slowly and build it up. You're probably going to be enrolled in cardiac rehab. So remember those steps and do it at your own level. And to be able to get back to that own level, it's every day remembering, what was my chest discomfort? What were my signs and symptoms? And knowing that if they ever occur again, that you will now know how to manage it. And hopefully they won't, but that you will be, if that's what's frightening you, you're afraid to exercise because chest discomfort might come back. Well, sit with yourself and your family or your nurse before you go home, or with your GP, and say, is this what my chest pain was about? And be very sure that, I understand it. I'll know it again if it ever occurs, and I'll know what to do with it. So yes, get back there, get exercising, do the cardiac rehab, and get out there and get back to a healthier and a more positive life, hopefully.
Thank you, Maeve. I suppose another kind of way to look at this kind of adjustment period, I suppose, maybe from your perspective, Noelle, another question we have. I was discharged from hospital 2 weeks ago after having to get 3 stents unexpectedly. I didn't get much information about what I can and can't do after the stents were put in, and I'm finding myself feeling kind of lost at sea, a bit afraid to do things like hoovering, but also unsure of whether I'm being worried for no reason. And is there any way that I can manage all of this thinking and worrying?
Yeah, I think that's a very common experience, that lost at sea, and like that, without having the kind of boundaries to push off. I suppose that what I would suggest in instances like that is two particular things. That the thinking and the worry, what can I do, what I can't do, it's, you know, it's a little bit about, again, that can be a symptom of the trauma. This, you know, that idea of being tired but wired, not being able to switch off this rumination, that often doing things like very grounding things, maybe like a body scan. I do an exercise with people where you put your hand on your heart, and if you think of babies, where are they first put? They're put on the heart and the chest area, because there is so many neurons and so on and so forth, or nerve endings and so on and so forth there. That in particular, and doing things like body scans, you know, even, you know, being in nature, that it automatically brings somebody into their body where they have more control over their thought processes and their fear processes. And I suppose when people are, as Maeve had said in earlier on, when people are brought into hospital, they have to hand themselves over to people who know about the mechanics of the heart. So they are put into this very vulnerable position. And indeed, the skill level is, you know, magnificent, that people are surviving more and more. But I suppose what can happen to us is we then externalize and hand over our sense of agency and power. So it's like, oh, they never told me, could I do the hoovering? Is it okay to bend over? So for me, there's something about people helping people to come back into themselves and say, okay, well, will I really be able to lift it? Maybe I'll get someone in the house to take it out of the press. I'll see if I can do maybe a small bit of the room, and I'll see how I feel. So even if you do half of the room in the hoovering, sit back, take a measure. How was that? Am I still okay? And then to start taking that ownership of like, yeah, I was able to do that. So there is something about, nobody is going to have all of the answers for every situation. And I would often say to people, like Maeve had said, you know, discover the symptoms, understand what's going on. Because particularly within the cardiac rehab program, I say to people, you know, keep asking. If you're having a twinge, don't worry about asking, even if it's day after day or week after week, because you will start to learn, oh yeah, that's this twinge. I always get that twinge when I'm doing this exercise, or I always get that heart race when I'm a little bit anxious about something, like I would have on a webinar, you know? So right now I would be having symptoms of a heart condition, but I do not have a heart condition, but it's just, you know, you're talking to a lot of people who are listening. So as people get to know and tune back in, and then testing it out with the GP, testing it out with the nurse or the doctor, say, you know, what is that? Because there are times when there might be tweaks that do need further investigation, but there is something about becoming your own physician. And I would certainly say that to a lot of people in the cardiac program. You're part of the team. You are not recipient of the service. You are part of your own team. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Noelle, that balance between asking questions, but also getting to know yourself, being your own physician. Thank you. And thank you, Maeve. Jonathan, can I ask you to share a little bit about your journey of coming to terms with your event?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I did find it hard to come to terms, and it did take me, you know, longer than I thought it would take. You know, I talked earlier about this anxiety, which was creating a few problems for me. And to come back to one of the points Maeve made about it, when I got home, that's when it really started to ramp up a little bit, because I didn't have that safety net of the people in hospital that would be able to help me if something happened. You know, I got home and I made sure that I was, you know, doing everything that they said, but what the acceptance of the event, it definitely took longer than what I thought it was going to be. You know, there's a few questions there around, you know, can you go back to normal life? That was me, absolutely. I didn't want to exercise because I thought, oh, they would tell me, everyone was telling me to exercise. I didn't know the heart was a muscle. This is how uneducated I was, and you have to build, you don't know more than you have to build an arm muscle, leg muscle, or yeah. So everyone was telling me to do that, and I just had this fear of, if I exercise, I'm going to take it too far and something's going to happen again. And it didn't. And it didn't, and it took me a while to get to that point, and it was only with the help really of like Croí yourselves that, to show me that, this is normal to feel like this, and this is absolutely, this is how you feel, and this is the journey you go on. And Noelle talks about that sort of roller coaster, that wave, that acceptance journey cycle, I call it. But it's safe to say, I've absolutely accepted it now, and I've actually turned it into a bit of a positive. I'm now in a better sort of physical condition than I probably was. The condition has been treated, risk factors have been reduced, so now I feel healthier now than I did prior, if that even can make any sense. But it's definitely took some time to accept. Yeah.
And Jonathan, you mentioned that the Croí program helped, which is wonderful. I'm delighted to hear that. But was there anything else? So Noelle had a couple of things that you suggested. Things like doing things that help us to calm down, to come into our bodies, being out in nature. Was there anything that you found really helped you along the way?
No, yeah, there was, and Noelle mentioned it before. Actually, was these body scan apps that are out there. Whenever I had this anxiety feeling or things just got a little bit too much, I would go to my bedroom, I would lie in the bed, and I would just put this 15-minute body scan on, and it actually, you feel it just disappears. I wouldn't say disappears, but it certainly reduces. And it's just taking 15 minutes to do that overall body scan, and away from everyone, on your own, definitely helped. And also,
Fantastic.
speaking to like my GP, there was a couple of occasions where I did go and visit the GP and say I'm a bit concerned about this. One of them turned out to be indigestion, but he was like, no, absolutely, come and check these things out, because you have to, particularly with the history. So I think I learned that it's okay to feel like that, but it did take me a long time to accept it.
Yeah. So interesting that the examples that you gave there of things that helped you mirrored exactly what Noelle was talking about, and very much linking with what Maeve was talking about, the going to the GP, getting information when you needed it, but also going for that self-care body scan option. And you mentioned that you used an app for that, so people might be able to find different apps like Calm or Headspace, and these kinds of things are on YouTube as well. Thank you, Jonathan. So we've talked about the fact that it's completely normal and understandable to feel down or to struggle, whatever it is that you're feeling after having a cardiac event, and in that, very up and down period of time following the event. Feelings of sadness, feelings of worry, normal reactions to a difficult and scary and often unexpected event. But Noelle, can you tell us when it is time for professional help?
Yeah, so, I suppose the research shows that in general, about a third of people can move through a cardiac event reasonably unimpacted emotionally. I suppose another third, stop, reflect, think, consider, so on and so forth. And we'll probably need a little bit more help from, friends, family, and maybe even within the cardiac team. I suppose there is about a third then that probably would end up in the likes of my office. I suppose there is, as I said, that initial period of time which is unpleasant, and unfortunately it is part of the package. It is where the intensity of that fluctuation or the intensity of the overwhelming emotions doesn't start to settle with a natural passage of time. That is where a person might be aided by looking for more professional help. I suppose here in the program in Tala, one of the things when I had started originally, the talk that I give, which is a lot of this information, it used to be towards the end of the cardiac program. And I made the suggestion that we moved it to the second week of the program, because people got that piece of information much earlier about what was normal, what wasn't normal, when to check in. And naturally, that actually reduced the referrals for individual work because people had the information. But I suppose for me, there's something about kind of maybe, 6-8 weeks, coming up to 3 months, if you're having a very acute, a very intense experience of emotional reactions, that would be a time to look into getting some more professional help around that. Because I suppose there's two things that may be going on. The first is a trauma reaction that is very much stuck in your body and brain. And what a trauma reaction in your brain is that your brain never turned off the off button. So it thinks it's Tuesday morning when you had the heart attack all the time. And it's just going round and round and round. And so you're having all of these reactions all of the time. So it needs some help to close the cycle. But also what can happen is people may have pre-existing psychological, maybe conditions they didn't even know that they had, that burst open when a trauma lands. So you might be having the sole trauma reaction that you're simply trying to adjust and get back to normality. But actually, I have seen that there can be people where there might be something already lurking under the surface that they got really good actually at just carrying on and brushing it aside and so on and so forth. And I suppose this is the part for me that the heart forces people into, as Jonathan said, things are better in his life, but he was forced through that canal nearly. And so for me, there's something about when people come in to me, it's where that reaction isn't settling and I do maybe a piece of trauma work. Again, if that's not moving through, I know I'm dealing with something that is going on beneath in this person's history or personality in advance. They were just really good at managing that. So for me, there's something about, it's hard to put a time on something. For me, it's where the measure of the emotion is not lessening naturally. And, I suppose it would be great if everybody could get a session, of counselling or psychology or something like that. And unfortunately, that's not available to everybody. There's certainly no harm in it. But for people, maybe around the country, there are a couple of specific approaches that do work with trauma. And I'm thinking of the likes of somatic experiencing, and I think of the likes of EMDR, which specifically look at ensuring that brain story turns itself off. So even if a person can't get to a cardiac psychologist, there are other ways to do this as well. But I think, family, and particularly family members or even friends, might start to see, he's not settling. He's just not himself. And it might come through as impatience. It might come through as tearfulness. There's a lot of that with heart conditions. The tears just pour. But it can also be irritability. That's also a strong symptom. So friends or family might just start to say, look, I'm noticing this isn't settling for you. You're struggling for a bit too long now. Will we think about having a conversation with the GP or with the cardiac nurses? So it needs a gentle approach, because people can all too often think that they now have an additional problem of a mental health problem, but it's not that. It's a reaction to the context of what has happened. And that's a really important distinction, I think.
Absolutely, Noelle, thank you. And as you mentioned there, talking to the cardiac nurses and bringing it up with your GP is a good place to start. And it is going to be very different from place to place in the country. And there may be people on here this evening who, are really interested in maybe talking to someone about this, maybe something that Noelle or anyone else has said this evening has struck a chord with you in relation to yourself or a family member. So the cardiac nurses, the GP, a great place to start. And there are other ways that you might be aware of in your locality, and your GP can help you with in terms of maybe taking a next step to get some professional help with how you're feeling. And we have Maeve on the Heartlink West nurse line as well, if we can support you in signposting in any way, and we'll share the details of the line at the end. Jonathan, can I come back to you again for a moment, if you don't mind? So, Noelle has shared, really, really useful information there on what might be happening for someone who maybe hasn't settled emotionally after an event. Would you mind sharing your experience from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that, I needed that little more help that Noelle talked about. Some people need that. I definitely needed that, but my head was telling me I needed it, but I was afraid to ask for it. So I must have probably, suffered in silence for about 6 months before it actually took a family member to say to me, something's just not quite right. Something's not quite right. You're not your usual self. I'd normally be quite a confident person, but I'd be quite tentative in sort of doing things and making decisions. Even like going out and mowing the lawn in the garden, I'd be like, oh, do I really want to go and do that because I might have a heart attack when I go out and mow the lawn? and it took someone to actually notice it for me to say, yeah, I don't feel right, and I think I need to try and maybe go and get some help, and I did, and I was fortunate that it was right in the middle of my Psychologist Croí program, and the guys at Croí on the team, they pointed me in the right direction of getting some counselling, and it really helped. And it did take some sessions, and I'm glad that I did go and to those sessions and ask for that help. Now, I guess my only regret is I didn't ask for it any earlier. I didn't ask for it sooner. So yeah, and for someone who'd never received any counselling, never even thought about going to counselling, never had the need to go to counselling, it was quite a scary thought, but it's absolutely not. It's you understand throughout this whole journey that it's okay to sort of not be okay and have those feelings and talk to people, and yeah, it definitely helped me out. So
thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. And it's kind of come up a couple of times now, the role of the family or the role of the people around us, and major events in our lives, they're often a family affair. They often involve those around us as well as ourselves or an individual. And the involvement of family members is something that we see a lot. And I'm sure there are people on the call this evening who are there with a family member, or maybe have a family member in mind, but it can be difficult to navigate difficult times like after an event in our relationships. So Noelle, we have a question with that in mind. How do I stop my spouse fussing over me? I feel like it's getting in the way of me building my confidence back, and I feel like it's actually adding to my sense of stress. Any thoughts on that?
It's a very common one for sure. And I suppose the way I look at those experiences of people and of their family is that while one person in the family may have had the physical heart attack, the trauma happened to everybody. And in some circumstances, there will have been family members present who will have seen, as Maeve said, will have been there when the ambulance came, or will have maybe even driven the person to the hospital. So the trauma has landed right into the family. But there's only one person taken into the cardiac program, or there's only one person comes in here to me. And I suppose what starts to happen is that space for the family, all those reactions that were talked about earlier, I can guarantee you that everybody in the family has felt those. They have watched, if you think of it, it's very hard. It's probably harder to watch someone being ill and sick than it is to be ill and sick yourself. To witness something and actually not be able to make it better is really hard for us. So they have witnessed something that has frightened them. And also they have the questions of what would have happened if we lost him, and so on and so forth. So that kind of fussing, that wrapping in cotton wool is I suppose a response to their distress. And what I would say to people, when they are experiencing that, and yes, they feel that they are in the fishbowl, and yet they're coming into cardiac and they're doing their exercises and they're having fun with other people on the program and things are improving. But the people on the outside, the family members, don't get to see that all of the time. So there is a point in time in recovery, I believe, where the person who had the event, like the patient as such, moves beyond the position of the family. So the family is often stuck back there on Tuesday morning when it happened, but the individual is getting better at the exercise. They're starting to feel a little bit more balanced in themselves. And so what kind of needs to happen is the patient turning into leading the family through this a little bit more and communicating over to the family, I am improving. I am so much better. I'm noticing my mood is getting better. And I suppose we're not very good. People are good to say I'm worried about something, but we're not quite so good to say I'm feeling joyous about this. I'm really confident. We're not a culture that does that. But actually, that's what family members need to hear. They need to hear that you're okay. You're okay. You're doing better. You're feeling stronger. You're thinking now a bit about the future, so that they can start to release the tension. Because when someone has gone through something, and indeed it has been witnessed by others, we're kind of programmed to think, if I hold all this really closely, I will control that it doesn't happen again, and we'll be fine. We won't be upset again. And that is the red herring of trauma, because actually then that becomes the problem, because you don't live fully. So I suppose in some ways for the people who are feeling wrapped in cotton wool, it is about, maybe the cotton wool needs to be moved over to the family for a little while. Maybe it needs to be conversations of like, gosh, what was it like for you that evening? Because people are kind of a little afraid to upset one another in families. But actually, I would often see, and unfortunately, we don't do it in our program here, but there is certainly need for a space for family support where they get to flush through. They thought the person in their life, their dad, the mom, whoever, that this was the end. So they were looking at a whole other landscape for those number of hours and days. So I think the family piece is often misunderstood, actually. Yeah.
Very powerful, Noelle. Thank you. And you touched on that, that really very real sense of the brush with mortality that comes with a cardiac event. So we have, a kind of a short and sharp question here related to that kind of we might move on to from that point about the family involvement. I thought my time was up. I don't know how to move on from that. Any thoughts on that, Noelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a part of the discussion that often doesn't actually happen, the brush with death. So, there is that common rhetoric of, sure, all our time is limited. It's the only thing guaranteed in life, and so on and so forth. But we say that in a way of, it's over there. It'll happen to me some other day. It's over there. But actually, then you go and you have a heart attack and you get sight of the other side. That illusion, that curtain drops for a little while. You peek in, you're back in the world, which is pottering along, just doing the do. And I do think that brush with mortality makes people look at the fragility in many ways of their body, of their time. How come they weren't taken? What's left to do? But I think that is very frightening to the human psyche, to really get a felt sense of this could finish right now. And so it's almost like being declothed, being exposed, and then having to put on a new layer of a new layer of skin, really. So I suppose there's something about that will settle with time, because I suppose that's the spirituality piece, really, of, where people may have beliefs or faith can be very helpful at that point. Because there's something about, the heart has offered this in some way. It is incredibly frightening, but you can't live in that place, because that is the place that says there is no tomorrow. And actually, people do find a way of recognizing that, and perhaps hopefully really being present and valuing and changing what they may or may not need to change. But I suppose for me, there's something, but I would suspect that a lot of anxiety that can come afterwards, maybe after the settling of the dysregulation, but that there are conversations that people really may wish to have in order to support that almost reintegration to the world, that sort of, you're back in it, but it's not the same. And you do know that there is a difference. So I would never underestimate that may need some support for people, because it is, they talk in the likes of meditation and Buddhism about insight meditation. And when you get that sharp insight, it can absolutely rattle us. So yeah, I do think again that it's something that isn't spoken about enough, actually. So it's a good question. It's a good thing to raise, Lisa. Yeah.
Thank you, Noelle. And Jonathan, would you have a perspective on that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I definitely thought I was a goner. I actually remember saying to the it's one moment I do remember is saying to the paramedics, "Oh, am I going to die?" Like it literally came out of my mouth, and I thought, wow, it's just it was like a movie moment. The whole getting from home to hospital, etc. It felt like it was just a whirlwind of a movie, and I remember it distinctively. But and it took me some time. It took me that I had to accept that moment as well, that, oh wow, did I really come at 36? Did I really come this close to death? And what I did is eventually I actually used it as a bit of a reset moment. So my life at the time, my career was flying around lots of different countries, and sometimes I would do 5, 6, 7, 8 flights a week, no time at home. And I just said, enough's enough, that's I've seen what Noelle said there, peeked around the curtain, seen the other side, and didn't fancy going over too soon. So yeah, we used it as a bit of a reset. And yeah, now it's I have a new job, which is less stress, which is great. Started a family, which I probably wouldn't have done prior to this. So I don't want to be a cliche and say it changed my life, but it certainly made me say, whoa, things have got to change, and yeah, we have to do something different. So yeah, no, I was definitely there. I was there, but I've definitely come out the other side.
Your heart stuck with you, and you stuck with it.
Yeah.
Applying one of those lovely lines for this evening, and really thank you so much for sharing that, Jonathan. That's that's a really intense and personal moment, and it's so powerful to be able to share something like that on an event like this to this audience. So thank you. And believe it or not, we are moving towards the kind of end of our session together. We've covered so much. I think there might be a part 2 and a part 3 to all of this. And hopefully we can gather some feedback from the audience this evening to see what was useful and maybe what we should focus on in future. But I want to take this opportunity now just to ask our panelists to run through for us, for the audience here this evening, what your real kind of key, if you remember nothing else, please remember this type points are from the discussion this evening. So Maeve, hopefully those slides are up. Would you mind just sharing with us your top takeaways?
Yeah, I suppose my top takeaways are, if you have symptoms of a heart attack and stroke, call 999 112 without delay. That's what the services are there for. If you've had an event, be it heart attack or anything else, remember that Croí and your local cardiac rehab centres are there for you to support your recovery. And talk to your GP or your specialist service if you're finding the event is taking over your life, and get referred for counselling. There is help there. It is hard to find it, so just call for help.
Thank you, Maeve. And Noelle?
Yeah, so my kind of takeaways, I think, are, there are normal reactions to abnormal events. They're not necessarily pleasant. We can't take them away, but you're not going mad. The heart for me in my work, it's the emotional center. It has spoken. We need to listen to it. We need to understand and to connect back in. I often say my work with people is about helping them to come home to their heart. And the final point is I see it day in, day out. People can heal and grow post-cardiac event. And like that, sometimes lives can be enhanced because of the event. So, I see people get better all of the time. Yeah.
Thank you, Noelle. And Jonathan?
Yeah, mine's just a really simple one from a patient point of view. It's don't delay, ask for help. Like I said earlier in the conversation, my only regret is I didn't ask for the help earlier. And it is available. There's loads of organizations and groups around and family members that are there. And I just wish I put my hand up earlier and asked for help. So yeah.
Good on you, Jonathan. And to say as well that it is never too late to reach out as well. So I'm going to invite Emma now to join us to speak just for a few moments on her research project, and then we just have a couple of slides to finish out to tell you about a couple of the things that are coming up. So I'll hand over to you, Emma.
Hello everybody, my name is Emma Ryan and thank you for having me here today. That was so informative. I thought that was brilliant, guys. I suppose just to give you a little bit of information about me. So I'm currently doing my doctorate in clinical psychology in the University of Limerick. And as part of my doctorate, I'm carrying out a study exploring the personal experience of coping with anxiety following a heart attack. So I'm here today to explain my study and to invite you to participate if you're interested. As already mentioned throughout today's webinar, anxiety is really, really common after having a heart attack. You might worry about your health, the impact of the heart attack on your day-to-day life. As Jonathan mentioned, kind of those changes that you're being encouraged to make, like exercise, and also, I suppose, the fear that you'll have another heart attack. And it could really present in lots of different ways. It could present in our thoughts, so in our head, in how we feel, and also, I suppose, in our actions. So, for example, maybe avoiding things like activities or events because you're worried or you're feeling nervous. And that's all really, really common, as the guy said, after such a sudden and such a traumatic event. So in relation to my study, in order to participate in the study, you must have experienced a heart attack and currently experience anxiety symptoms. And if you'd like to participate, firstly, you'll be provided with an online link. So it's just a link that you click into, and you'll be invited to provide consent and also complete a brief questionnaire. And the brief questionnaire asks just questions in relation to yourself, like your age and time since your heart attack. And then there's a short anxiety related questionnaire as well. And it shouldn't take any longer than 10 to 15 minutes. It's quite short and simple, I promise. But yeah, if you do present, then I suppose with anxiety based on the questionnaire, you'll be contacted by email and invited to engage in an online interview with me. So it can all be done through kind of, I suppose, from the comfort of your own home. It's all online and it'll be very informal. I'm conscious that I use the word interview, but it will be more like a chat and very easygoing. And I'll just be asking you questions about your experience of anxiety, how you try to manage it, so how you've been really coping with it since your heart attack. There's really no right or wrong answers. It's your experience of anxiety. And I think it's really important to stress your experience because it looks so different for everyone that has it. So the interview will be audio recorded and it'll last around 45 to 60 minutes depending. I know that might sound long, but it'll fly by, trust me. And all the information that's gathered will be confidential. So note that you never be asked to say your name when it's being recorded. So there'll be no way of linking you with your responses. And I think that's really important to say. So it's all anonymized and you can change your mind. And if you wish to leave the study, that's no problem. So I suppose just to finish up, why is this study important? So I actually worked with cardiovascular patients before in a hospital setting, and I suppose I've seen firsthand how common anxiety is. And I think it's really, really important that research is done on this topic because unfortunately, there's not a lot out there. So that healthcare workers and other people can really understand anxiety after a heart attack and then know how best to support it. So how best to provide help so that you experience less anxiety, and because that's the main goal. And the only way that can be achieved is to hear your voice. So it might also be beneficial for you, I'm hoping, as you'll get to contribute to research in a really meaningful way. And also, I suppose anyone that does participate, I will be providing feedback, I suppose, on the results, so giving a leaflet on the results so that you can hear, I suppose, how other people have managed it as well. So yeah, I think that's everything I hope to say. Thank you for listening today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for Croí for such great support. An email will be sent out by Croí after today, just I suppose giving an information sheet on the study and then the online link that I mentioned. And also my email will be included too. So if anyone has any questions, please send me an email. And I'm happy to take questions as well today. I suppose it's just always important that all your questions are answered before participating in a study. So yeah, thanks very much. And I hope you'll consider participating in the study. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, Emma. Thank you so much. That was really clear. So if anyone happens to have a question for Emma, you can pop it in the Q&A or the chat. And also, as Emma said, you'll receive an email or with Emma's email in it, so you can contact her if you do have questions. But I'm conscious that we're just at 8, so I'm going to show you the last couple of slides to tell you what's coming up for us. So I mentioned Heartlink West, and Maeve mentioned it as well. This is our free nurse Maeve manned helpline, and it's available from 9 to 5:30 Monday to Friday. The phone number is there, 544-310, where you can email healthteam@croí.ie if you have any questions or concerns about your heart health. There's also a chat series on Thursdays at 11 a.m. on a whole range of different topics related to heart health, and you can find out more about that on our website, croí.ie. We have lots coming up. So on the 30th of September, we have another webinar, Heart to Heart with the Croí Health Team, Know Your Risk and Fight Heart Disease and Stroke. So September is World Heart Month. It's a big month for us at Croí. We have loads of events coming up that you can find out by joining our mailing list or checking out the website. And you can save the date for this webinar, 30th of September from 7 to 8 p.m. and the whole Croí Health Team. So exercise specialist, nurse, myself, health psychology, dietitian will all be represented there to share kind of a full picture in terms of knowing and managing your heart disease and stroke risk. Listen to your heart. We have another webinar on heart valve disease on Thursday, September 16th from 7 to 8 p.m. You can register there on croí.ie/valve webinar. And then kind of an extra added bonus next Wednesday, the 1st of September from 7 to 8 p.m. We have a webinar, Minding Your Heart Health. So again, with the Croí Health Team, quite a general kind of overview that comes with a free workbook if you sign up for that event on our website. So thank you for joining, and a huge thanks to the panel for an absolutely fantastic event. I hope you all have a lovely evening and there's some sunshine left wherever you are. Thank you for joining us.